Let's talk about the biggest problem with global shutters. It's now been more than a year since the launch of the Sony a9III and its one-of-a-kind full-frame global shutter. And I've been using this camera literally since the day it was announced. And as a whole, the a9III has absolutely lived up to the hype. And even more than that, I think it's safe to say that this camera has been a definitive moment in camera technology history. But after using this camera for more than a year now, I still run into one glaring problem. What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Vincent, and I'm a wedding and documentary photographer based out of Northwest Arkansas. And I create all kinds of content around wedding photography, portraits, off-camera flash, editing, gear reviews, and things like this video, where I try and break down a complicated topic and make it easier to understand. So if that sort of thing interests you, drop me a subscribe so you can keep up. Now, for this video, we are going to be talking about the global shutter found on the a9III, and specifically about one of the biggest problems I've run into with this new technology. More specifically, we're going to be talking about flash timing and trying to unpack some of the intricacies that come up when trying to work outside of traditional sync speeds. And for me, the biggest issue with the global shutter is centered around flash timing, because even after figuring out how exactly global shutter flash timing works, actually putting things into use can be a tedious task. That's because there is no real science or formula you can follow when adjusting your flash timing. If you have everything set up to work exactly perfect, but then you want to lower your flash power, that could totally change your flash timing setting. Likewise, if you have everything perfectly set and you simply want to change your shutter speed, that can also completely change the correct flash timing setting you need. And it doesn't stop there. If you know that your flash at full power and 1/80,000th of a second has something like a flash timing setting of 700, using a different brand of light or a different powered light could also cause your flash timing setting to change. To really showcase the problem here, let's compare the traditional flash sync method with the new global shutter flash sync method. When I'm working with flash in the field, the way things typically work when I'm using traditional sync speeds is I first get my camera set up for the ambient light, so ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Once I have that set, I turn my flash on to a general power and I take a test image. If the light is too bright, I turn it down. If the light is not bright enough, then I turn it up. And if the light is good, then it's good. Now, this is still the process I use with a global shutter so long as I'm at 1/500th of a second on my shutter speed or slower. But once I go above this 1/500th of a second shutter speed, things get a bit more complicated. When working with higher shutter speeds, I still get my ambient light set to where I want, and then I turn on the flash to a general power and take a test image. But before I know if the light is too bright or not bright enough, I first have to find the correct flash timing. This means I take a test image, adjust the flash timing, take another test image, and then compare this new test image to the previous test image. I then adjust the flash timing again, take another test image, and compare over and over again until I can see the light get to its brightest and then drop down in brightness. This way I know that one adjustment back on my flash timing is the correct adjustment, because it's at this setting where the power of the flash was at its brightest. At this point, I can determine if my flash power is good or needs adjustment. If it needs adjustment, then I have to adjust the flash power and then start the flash timing process all over again. Because anytime you make a change to the power of the light or change the shutter speed, you have to find the correct flash timing setting for that unique combination. In order to combat this sort of guesswork that needs to be done, I decided to just spend a day in the studio and make a chart that could tell me what flash timing I should use for all the various combinations of shutter speed and power I might find myself needing, at least in terms of full stops. So now, with my handy dandy chart, I can set my camera settings, turn on the flash to the starting power, look at the chart to set my flash timing, then take my test image. If I need more or less power, I can adjust the flash power up or down, and then reference the chart again to get the correct flash timing, which saves a ton of time having to make numerous flash timing adjustments, test images, and comparisons. And while this process works and isn't too bad to deal with in the field, it's unfortunately not that simple. You see, flashes have what's called a flash curve. What happens is when a flash fires, it takes time for that light to essentially turn on, and then it takes some time for that light to turn off. And all of the area within this curve is what makes up the total power of the light. Now, flashes are generally designed to work with traditional sync speeds. So a full power pop of light from a Godox AD200 takes around 1/250th of a second. And if I want less light, I simply turn my flash power down, which would give me less area under the curve. The thing to keep in mind here is that adjusting the power of a flash doesn't necessarily adjust the peak power. It might actually only adjust the amount of time the flash is on. So a flash at full power could have the same peak power as that same flash at half power, quarter power, or even as low as 1/8 power. But every single flash power adjustment would fit within the traditional sync speed of 1/250th of a second. And this is where the biggest problem lies when you start trying to sync flash with some of the higher shutter speeds you can achieve with the global shutter on the Sony a9III. Because the entire curve of light doesn't fit within this new higher shutter speed, which is exactly why we have this new flash timing setting. You have to adjust the flash timing so that this really short shutter speed lines up with the peak of this flash curve. This allows you to gather as much light as possible within your exposure. But because we are now taking just a small slice of these flash curves, we can actually no longer rely on the power adjustment of our flash. Because if multiple flash power settings give us the same peak power, we have the potential of gathering the same amount of light no matter which power we use. And you can see that in practice with these example images. All 5 images are taken at different power levels, yet we get pretty much the exact same exposure. Because when we take a 1/80,000th of a second slice of each curve, we capture the same amount of light. What this means is that when working at these crazy high shutter speeds, we can no longer rely on the ability to adjust our light level by adjusting the power of our flash. Instead, we need to resort to things like changing the distance of our light to the subject, using ND filters on the flash, or when possible, adjusting things like aperture and ISO. This also means that doing things like multiple light setups is much more difficult because you can't have something like a full power main light and a quarter power rim light, because at 1/80,000th of a second, they would actually give you the exact same output. You also can't go lower in power in order to access a different flash curve, because that would call for a different flash timing setting, and it's only possible to capture one of the 2 peak powers. Likewise, you also can't do something like use a less powerful light in combination with a more powerful light, because the flash timing of those 2 different lights most likely wouldn't be the same. And this is currently my biggest problem when using the a9III, especially in the field, under pressure, and on a timeline. Because while this new technology unlocks a ton of creative possibilities, it comes at the cost of having to add extra steps and problem solving to the process. But one thing to keep in mind is that while this all seems like a jumbled mess, we are literally on the cutting edge of what's possible. These difficulties are only coming up as we enter shutter speeds that no other camera on the market can achieve, and we're syncing flash with them. So don't get things twisted and think that this technology is more work than it's worth. The issues here are not a problem at all as long as you're using lower shutter speeds like 1/500th of a second, which is already a faster sync speed than any other camera aside from leaf shutter setups. In reality, the global shutter technology itself isn't at fault here. What this new technology has done though is push flash designs past the limits of what they were designed to do. Since flashes have never had to deal with syncing at such high shutter speeds, at least in a single burst of light, there was no need to engineer them to do so. In order to solve this issue, what we need is flash companies to evolve their designs in order to match pace with the new sync speeds unlocked by the global shutter. And flashes like those on offer from Sony and even the newly announced V100 Pro from Godox will already automatically adjust the flash timing for you. But the need to adjust flash timing is only part of the issue. Ideally, what we need is for every flash power to have its peak power at the same timing. And we need the power of the flash to be controlled by the peak of the power instead of being controlled by the peak of the power in combination with how long the flash is on. Once this is done, things will only get easier and more seamless because global shutters are not going away. So it only makes sense for flash companies to jump on board sooner rather than later. And if you happen to be wondering how much better global shutter sync is in comparison to things like traditional sync and high-speed sync, I already created a video walking through this, so I definitely recommend checking that video out after this one. The last thing worth noting here is that the current chart I have is for the Godox AD200 Pro Mark II, but in my use, it seems like the chart works for any AD200 as well as the Flashpoint variant. And I do plan on creating more of these charts in the future, so let me know in the comments if there is any particular light you might want me to do next. Lastly, if you found this useful or at least interesting, I'd appreciate you hitting that good old thumbs up button and dropping me a comment below. Also, make sure to follow me over on Instagram, and if you'd like to see some more of my more premium content, make sure to check out my Patreon channel where I walk through a ton of how-tos, editing walkthroughs, and so much more. With that, I'll see you on the next one.